Tonight, a tense exchange on Capitol Hill is raising serious questions about free speech, immigration power, and the limits of executive authority. What began as a routine congressional hearing quickly turned into a constitutional confrontation as Representative Pramila Jayapal directly challenged Secretary of State Marco Rubio over the arrest and detention of a foreign graduate student for writing an opinion article.
Representative Jayapal.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary Rubio, for being here. On March 21st, 2025, the State Department approved the revocation of a student visa for Rümeysa Öztürk, a Turkish citizen who is a graduate student at Tufts University, apparently simply for writing an op-ed. According to an internal State Department memo, you took this action under your discretionary authority to revoke visas, and soon after you revoked her visa, armed and masked plainclothes officers snatched Ms. Öztürk off the street and transported her to a prison in Louisiana. Mr. Secretary, do you really think that Ms. Öztürk's op-ed results in a foreign policy consequence for the United States?
I believe that case involves someone whose visa we never would have granted had we known ahead of time.
I'm not asking you that question. I'm asking you if you think an op-ed, but that's exactly, in fact, what happened. The State Department wrote a memo concluding that you did not have sufficient grounds to revoke Ms. Öztürk's visa. There was no evidence showing that she'd engaged in any activities were a threat to national security. And in fact, in May, a federal court ordered Ms. Öztürk's release from detention, noting that the sole basis for the government's detention appeared to be the fact that she co-authored this opinion piece in the Tufts newspaper in March of 2024. Where in the Constitution does it say that the Secretary of State can override the First Amendment protections of free speech? Is there a footnote that I missed somewhere?
There's no constitutional right to a student visa.
So, but is there a constitutional right? Does it say somewhere that Marco Rubio gets to determine which speech is appropriate and revoke student visas based on what you think constitutes free speech?
There's a statute that says the Secretary of State gets to determine whether someone is a threat. We deny visas every day all over the world.
Do you think that the Immigration and Nationality Act trumps the Constitution of the United States, Mr. Secretary?
Well, Congress can always change the law if you want, but I'm telling you,
Mr.
while I have the authority, I will continue to revoke the visas of these people that come here to tear this country apart.
You said that, Mr. Secretary. Let me reclaim my time because you are talking about revoking student visas based on what somebody says. And that means that you are trumping the legal Supreme Court, the supreme law of the land, which is the Constitution of the United States.
No one has a right to a student visa.
Mr. Rubio, why did the administration need to use masked, armed, unidentified agents to whisk somebody off the street and deny her counsel for almost 24 hours after her arrest?
Well, you'll have to ask the agencies that did that work. I'm not responsible for that. I'm responsible for revoking the visas of these people that come to tear this country
Rubio,
apart.
I'm talking about this particular case where you revoked the student visa of a Turkish citizen who was a graduate student who wrote an op-ed that you didn't like. And suddenly you allowed for masked men to whisk her off the street. And you have multiple jobs, apparently. You're the national security advisor as well. So don't tell me it's not your job who snatches her off the street.
We don't do the snatching, but I can tell you we do the visa revocations.
Let me ask you about the national security consequences of people, masked men on the streets, snatching people off the streets. If these are legitimate law enforcement agents carrying out proper arrests, why are they hiding their identities?
Because then radical crazies will try to hurt them.
So you think that U.S. agents who have almost always gone without face coverings, even when they're arresting some of the country's most dangerous criminals, suddenly have so much to fear from a graduate student who wrote an op-ed that they need to be masked? Is that
that law student was a guest in the United States on a student visa. No one's entitled to a student visa.
So you revoked her student visa based on an op-ed which trumps the supreme law of the land, which is the Constitution.
Someone's coming up here to stir up problems on our campus. We're going to revoke their visa.
She didn't do any of that. She wrote an op-ed.
Well,
she wrote an op-ed, and I'm talking to you about her particular case.
Claims and your claims. Those are not the facts.
Reclaiming my time, you revoked her student visa because she wrote an op-ed.
Would you revoke? We're going to do more.
I have another question for you. Would you revoke the visa of someone in the United States who published claims that, quote, Jews are an untrustworthy and dangerous group? Yes or no?
We will revoke the visa of anyone who's in this country as a guest who's here to stir up trouble.
Are you going to revoke the visa of somebody who made that?
I mean, the case. I'll look at it. I'm looking to get crazy people out of our country.
It's not just about revoking. You actually,
Secretary Rubio, excuse me,
reclaiming my time. Can you explain to me why the Trump administration granted refugee status to Charles Kleinhaus, the white Afrikaner who tweeted that exact statement that I just said? There's the case.
That's not a visa.
You granted that person to enter the United States.
That's a totally different process. That's someone that applied here through a totally different process.
Secretary Rubio,
visas are a privilege.
Secretary
we deny
Rubio,
them all the time, and we'll revoke them.
You revoked a visa based on an op-ed, and then you allowed for masked men to snatch somebody off the street.
Your time has expired.
That's your claim. That's not accurate.
Recognize ranking.
If you care about civil liberties,
so much, Mr.
government
Chairman.
power,
Thank you,
or how
Secretary
far
Rubio,
free speech protections
here.
really go in the United
March
States,
21st,
this is a moment you
the State
need to
Department
understand.
approved the
And before we dive in, make sure you
student
subscribe so you
visa
do not
for
miss our
Rümeysa
in-depth
Öztürk,
coverage of
a
stories
Turkish
like this.
citizen
The
who
case
is a
centers on
graduate
Rümeysa
student at Tufts
Öztürk, a
University,
Turkish citizen and
apparently
graduate
simply
student at Tufts
for writing
University.
an op-ed.
According to
According to
testimony
an
during the
internal State
hearing,
Department
her student
memo,
visa
you
was
took this
revoked in
action
March of
under your
2025
discretionary
after she
authority to revoke
co-authored an
visas.
op-ed in her
And soon
university
after you
newspaper.
revoked her
The
visa,
State Department
armed and
approved the
masked
revocation under
plainclothes
Secretary
officers
Rubio's
snatched
discretionary
Ms.
authority,
Öztürk
and
off the
shortly
street and
afterward,
transported her
armed and
to a
masked
prison
plainclothes
in
officers
Louisiana.
detained
Mr.
Öztürk on
Secretary,
the
do you really
street
think
and
that Ms.
transported her
Öztürk's
to a detention
op-ed
facility in
results
Louisiana.
in a foreign
There was no
policy
allegation
consequence
that she had
for the
committed a
United
crime,
States?
no
involves someone
charge
whose
of
visa we never would
espionage,
have granted
no
had we
claim of
known ahead of
violence,
time.
I'm
and
not
only
asking
a
you that
published
question. I'm
opinion
asking
Well, I'm
you
piece.
if you
telling
think
you,
If
an
this is your
op-ed-
first time hearing about
if an
this case,
op-ed
that fact
which,
alone should give you
but
pause.
that's
And if
exactly,
you want
in
clear
fact,
breakdowns like
what
this
happened.
every
The
time
State
major
Department
hearings
wrote a
happen,
memo
hit subscribe
concluding
now.
that you did not have
Representative
sufficient
Jayapal did
grounds
not mince
to
words.
revoke Ms.
She
Öztürk's
pressed
visa.
Rubio on whether
There
an
was
op-ed
no
written by a
evidence showing
graduate
that she had
student could
engaged in
reasonably
any
be
activities
considered
that were
a
a
foreign
threat to
policy
national
threat.
security. And in
Rubio's
fact, in
response
May, a
was
federal
blunt.
court
He said
ordered
the visa
Ms.
never
Öztürk's
would have been
release from
granted
detention,
had the
noting that
government
the
known her
sole
views ahead of
basis,
time. That
sole
answer
basis for the
immediately
government's
raised a
detention
deeper
appeared to be the
issue
fact
because an
that she
internal State
co-authored this
Department
opinion
memo
piece in
had
the
already
Tufts
concluded there were
newspaper
insufficient
in March
grounds
of
to revoke
2024.
Öztürk's visa.
Where
Even
in the
more
Constitution
significant,
does it
a
say
federal
that the
court later ordered
Secretary
her
of
release,
State
stating that the
can
sole basis for her
override the
detention
First
appeared to be
Amendment
her participation in writing that opinion
protections
piece.
of free speech?
This is where
Is
the
there a
hearing
footnote
shifted
that I
from
missed
policy
There's no
somewhere?
debate to
constitutional right to a
constitutional
student visa.
confrontation.
But is there
Jayapal
a
asked the
constitutional
question
right?
many
Does
Americans
it
have
say
likely
somewhere
asked
that Marco
themselves while
Rubio
watching this
gets to
unfold.
determine
Where in the
which
Constitution
speech is
does it say the
appropriate
Secretary of
and
State
revoke
can
student visas
override
based
First
on
Amendment
what
protections?
you think
Her point
constitutes
was not
free
that
speech?
Öztürk had a
There's a
constitutional
statute
right
says
to a
the Secretary of
visa,
State
but
gets
that the
to determine
government
whether
appeared to
someone
be
is a threat.
punishing
We deny
speech,
visas
Do you
every day
think
all
that
over
First
the
the world.
Amendment
INA, do you
explicitly
think that the
protects.
Immigration and
Rubio
Nationality Act
responded by
trumps the
drawing a
Constitution
sharp
of the United
distinction.
States, Mr.
He argued
Secretary?
there is
Congress can
no
always change the law if you
constitutional right
want,
to
but
a
I'm
student
telling you,
visa.
Mr.
while
Secretary,
I have the
Cited
let me
statutory
be clear.
authority
to
allowing
revoke the
him to
visas of these
determine whether
people that
someone
come to
poses
You
a
said
threat.
that, Mr.
That
Secretary.
answer
Let me
did not
reclaim my
resolve the
time
concern.
because you
It
are talking
escalated
about
it.
revoking
And if you
student
want more
visas based on what
explanations that go
somebody
beyond
says,
sound bites,
and that means that
subscribe
you
so you
are
stay
trumping
informed. At the heart of this dispute is a fundamental legal tension. Immigration law does give the executive branch broad discretion over who enters or remains in
Why
the
did
country.
the
At the
administration,
same time,
Mr. Rubio,
the
why did
First
the
Amendment
administration need
prohibits
to
the government
use
from punishing
masked,
individuals for
armed,
protected speech.
unidentified
Courts
agents
have
to whisk somebody
historically
off the
allowed
street
greater
and
leeway
deny
when
her
dealing with
counsel
non-citizens,
for almost
especially at the
24 hours
border.
after
Well,
her
you'll
But
have
this
to
case
ask the
is
agencies
different
that did that
because
work.
Öztürk
you
was
have-
already living
that
in
I'm
the United
responsible for
States,
revoking the
studying
visas of these
legally,
people
and
that come to
expecting
Secretary
to use
country
for
Rubio, I'm
university
talking
Never
about
should have
this
allowed him in.
particular
That blurs the line
case
between
where you
immigration
revoked the
control
student
and
visa
viewpoint-based
of a
punishment.
Turkish
Jayapal pushed
citizen,
even further,
who was a
whether the
graduate
Immigration
student who
and
wrote an
Nationality
op-ed that you
Act
didn't
could
like,
trump the
and suddenly
Constitution
you allowed
itself.
for masked
Rubio's
men to
response
whisk her
was
off the
revealing.
street.
He
And
said
you have
Congress
multiple
can change
jobs.
the law
Apparently,
if it
you're the
wants,
national
but
security
until then,
advisor as
he
well.
has the
So don't
authority
tell me
and
it's not your
intends to
job
continue
who
revoking visas
snatches her
from
off
people
the
he
street.
believes
If
come
these
to
are
tear
but I
this
can tell you
country
we do the
apart.
visa
Let
That
me
decision
ask you
is
about the
likely to be
national security
scrutinized
consequences
closely by
of
legal
people,
scholars,
masked
civil rights groups, and courts
men
because
on
it
the
frames
streets
speech as a
snatching
threat
people
rather
off
than a
the
protected
streets.
right.
If these
As
are
this case
legitimate law
continues to
enforcement
move through the
agents
courts
carrying out
and Congress
proper
debates
arrests,
the
why are they
boundaries of
hiding their
executive
identities?
power, one
Because
thing is
then
clear. This
radical
is not
crazies
just
will
about
try to hurt
immigration.
them.
So
It is
you,
about
so
how
you
free
think that
expression is
U.S.
treated
agents
when it
who
becomes
have almost always
inconvenient
gone
to
without
those in
face
power.
coverings,
If you
even when
want
they're arresting
continued
some of the
coverage
most,
that breaks
some
down
of the
these issues
country's
in
We're not
plain
most
allowing
language and
dangerous
keeps you ahead of the
criminals,
headlines,
suddenly
make sure
have
you
so much to
subscribe
fear
because we will be
from a
following this story
graduate student
closely.
who wrote an
And remember,
op-ed
hearings
that
like this
they
are
need to
not
be
just
masked?
political
Is that-
theater.
is that
They
That
shape
lawsuit
real
was a
lives
guest in
and
the
real
United
freedoms.
States on a student
Stay
visa.
informed,
No one's
stay
entitled to a
engaged,
student
and
visa.
So you
subscribe
revoked
for
her
clear,
student
in-depth
visa
reporting.
on